But what I'm here to talk about is I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you an update on the Indian Trail Unified Development Ordinance update and Land Development Standards Manual update. This is a project in the making for over the past year or two. We've talked about the need to do it, and we just finally kicked it off relatively recently, and had been making some progress. So I saw an opportunity to pull in the planning board into to share some information with you on on proposals that have been developed, and to keep you in the loop, because ultimately you're going to be asked to provide, just like you did with the secret study, you'll be asked to provide a recommendation to the town council on the UDO update. And so I don't want to hit you with it in the future all at once without having any background. Similar to the secret study, we have a steering committee as well that kind of tracks the project periodically to kind of serve as a sounding board for proposals, and provides feedback to make sure that that we're heading on the right course with our various changes and whatnot. And it's been real helpful. And actually, Ms. Towns is our representative, and actually Ms. Mimi also attended our most recent committee meeting just to learn more and share some feedback. And what I'd like to do before I start going into my kind of overview and presentation is I'd like to ask Ms. Towns, as the committee representative, and she's I think attended 3 or 4 meetings, and some other I think also this stakeholder group meetings that we had many months ago. If you'd like to share just any immediate thoughts or things that you've learned so far participating in this process before I kick off the presentation.
It's a very extensive process, and one of the things that I'm finding, I looked at some of the material, and I said, do we have enough time to finish this? Because I feel that as with each meeting, there's always a new little ordinance that more or less triggers something in another ordinance. It's sort of like a puzzle in a way, but with the way that it's being formulated, I think it's going to be very, very beneficial for developers and residents to look into the ordinance and see exactly the process. To see that for the town of Indian Trail, you have to go and submit an application and, do various procedures. And there will be definitions spelled out, and hopefully we can do a glossary for definitions so that people will understand what a UDO means in real language. But I really think that the project is going very, very well. And as time goes on, this isn't a finished product, because with new development, we're going to have new problems and may have to revise some of the ordinances that we have again. Not the whole book, but I'm sure that, we'll have new ordinances and a revision and a couple that we've already updated. Any questions?
Great. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Ms. Mimi, anything to add from your last?
No, it was very informative. I'm very grateful that I had an opportunity to attend, and I look forward to seeing, just the impact of Indian Trail and just the growth. I mean, I look forward to seeing just how the businesses are going to work together just to make this continue to make this into a great town. I mean, I know we have a lot of other things that we have to do that's out of our control, but I look forward to seeing continuous growth in the town. So, thank you.
Great. Well, I appreciate you both sharing that perspective, and I agree, particularly one of the comments about this is not when we're done with this project, which I'm very looking forward to to reaching a conclusion. It's not the end. There's always going to be the need. Things will need to be updated to changing conditions, changing technology. There'll be concepts that we thought were a great idea. We put them in practice, and that didn't turn out the way we thought it was going to turn out, and you got to make changes. So it's a living, it's definitely a living, breathing document. And so, but yeah, to the point, yeah, we hope we'll get some lifespan out of this where you're not having to rewrite it significantly after just a short while. So, and nor do we expect to. So, I appreciate that overview. And so, what I'd like to do is, I've taken two presentations that our consultant Stewart have put together for the steering committee, and I've kind of combined them in together. Cut some things out, added some things, and to give you this overview. And so I'm going to probably go through this stuff pretty rapidly because it is a fair amount of material. And again, I'm just trying to give you kind of a high-level overview. But we're going to break the presentation up into two parts. Part one, I want to give you some project background and an overview of kind of significant changes that have been made to select chapters. And then in part two, again, if we want to continue forward, and we don't have to if we've kind of extended our time here, I'd like to give you an overview of significant changes to some of the development standards that we have in our Unified Development Ordinance and discuss next steps. And this presentation is not going to be a line-by-line overview of the UDO. It's a 400-plus page document. That's not what this is for. This is just to give you a high-level overview. And again, we'll see how far we get. If we can get through the whole presentation, that's wonderful, but I also don't want to overstay my welcome. So kind of go forward. So our goals for the project have been fairly comprehensive, but ultimately, what we're trying to do is kind of refresh and update the UDO to address some challenges. We want to, address current market trends. Again, that's the changing technology, consumer preferences, things like that. We want to remove confusing terms or outdated standards or things that just don't make sense even to us, the planners who look at the stuff on a daily basis. We've had changes in the general statutes, a lot of changes in the general statutes, and even in case law, where we have to go back regardless if we want to. We have to go back and change those our ordinances to be consistent. And there's some goals and policies from the town overall that we need to incorporate, like secret study or maybe the comprehensive plan. We also want to do practical improvements like improve the graphics, make the document user-friendly, so that it's a very comprehensive document, but we want it, to the extent we can, we want to make it so a business owner could open it up and reasonably find, can I locate my business in this zoning district, and maybe some basic standards that would be associated. And to the extent we can is try to incorporate some flexibility, and so not having just a one-size-fits-all approach. And so those are kind of our broad goals that we're hoping the UDO will address when we're done with it. And again, with this approach, with those goals, we want to have some feedback from the community. And now the UDO is by and large, as you know, is a technical kind of a technical document, and even us planners who work with it on a daily basis, sometimes it challenges us to understand it and apply it correctly and fairly. So we've used from a community feedback. We had a stakeholder group that was formed, and I can't remember the exact number of, I want to say maybe 40 or 50 members of our community representing a variety of interests. I think we had some planning board representation. Mr. Noble, I think you were attended. And we had designers, developers, home builders, nonprofit representatives. We really tried to cast the net far and wide in our community to get just some variety of input on issues in the community for those that have touched the ordinance, what are issues with the ordinance, and just get that broad feedback to help kind of funnel that into those goals that I mentioned earlier. And so, and then with that also the steering committee that Ms. Towns is a member of. We had quite a bit of feedback from the stakeholder, the stakeholder meetings, and you actually can find that on our website. We tried to be as transparent as we could. We compiled it in an organized document and put it on the website. Take a look at it. You agree with it, disagree with it, but we wanted to be transparent with that, with that feedback. And so some of the things we received, and this isn't meant to be a snapshot of everything that we heard, but just some examples. We heard some feedback that it'd be helpful to have some flexibility with our surveying requirements and as-built requirements. Again, that one size fits all. And we found examples where, and even in our own application, where well, maybe we don't need to. Even though the code says you have to have a survey or an as-built survey when a project is built, maybe it's not really relevant in some particular cases. And so there's some feedback we received from the surveying community on that. Some other feedback we received was that sometimes the process can take very long, and Part of that is kind of within our control from the standpoint of like a rezoning process. I mean, it is a fairly extensive process. Katie referenced a 4-month process, for conditional zoning on that Poplin project. That's from an averaging standpoint, that's a fair estimate. And that's a fair amount of time. And so we're looking at ways that we can maybe help with that and shorten that process up, or maybe come up with other processes where you could reach the same goal, but in a quicker timeline. So we're trying to look at those with a fresh perspective and try to be as business friendly as we can, but while also protecting the quality of life that we have and our citizens too. So it's a balancing act, and so we're going to try and walk that tightrope as best we can. We're also, again, just trying to streamline our everyday processes. We're taking a fresh look at whether or not we need a process for the processes that we have. Are they all appropriate? Are there any that we can eliminate, or steps that we can eliminate? And just make sure we really try to be as efficient as possible. One good thing we did was we implemented that Evolve or InfoVision digital permitting system. Some of you may be familiar with it, others may not, but we went digital a year or so ago. That's been a tremendous resource, and it just worked out well. The county decided to use the same technology, so we can really help our customers in the processing of permits and shaving off a fair amount of review time. With the feedback we also received is try to to the extent we can, let's give the development community more predictability and flexibility where appropriate. And so again, that's why you see a lot of the same terminology in our goals too. Okay. So the first part of this presentation, when we start jumping into the meat, we're going to talk about the following divisions of the UDO. With the exception of maybe the last two, these are what we call kind of like our administrative chapters. And as I've talked to Katie, and Katie and Mead have been, Mead Bradshaw, our other senior planner, they've been a tremendous resource in this, because it's really been a team process in updating the UDO. Not only just the planning department, but our managers involved, our town attorneys are involved. I mean, the consultants heavily involved. So it's really been a big tent process to get this to make it as good of an ordinance as we can. But with these chapters, with the exception of 1400 and 1500, are considered our administrative chapters, and how we process things, how we do things. Again, it can be kind of dry, but it's incredibly important to make sure, again, for those that efficiency's sake, that are we being efficient with our time and our steps, and more importantly, our customers' time. And so let's go ahead and kind of jump into some of those. One of the things we've tried to do is clarify roles and responsibilities, and making that very transparent, whether it's with all of our boards and committees, what do they do, and how do they do it? And so, and try to get away from text, paragraphs of text, and try to put where we can, put that information in a table. So again, it's easy to follow. If we have to just for ourselves review the information, it's quick and it's easy to find, very clear. It's also very clear for yourselves. If what does a board of adjustment, or I'm sorry, what does a planning board do? This is I can open up and show you a table. This is what you do. This is your role in the various processes. We've also had just some practical things, like for example, final plats. If you look at the code now, if someone, a surveyor or developer, wants to protest or is unhappy about a decision we reach about a final plat, the appeals go to the town council versus the Board of Adjustment, which is not a very efficient process. The Board of Adjustment is a much better suited entity to process these appeal requests, and that's how they're kind of set up. And so we made just kind of very practical tweaks like that, and having preliminary plans, which are the plans associated with subdivisions. The way the code is kind of a little squishy on when the preliminary plan for a subdivision is a part of a conditional rezoning. It states that it needs to be reviewed by town council. Yet we have very detailed preliminary plans with the rezoning, and so we wanted those to be recognized as the official preliminary plan, so there's not some secondary step to go before council. It's sort of, when you get a rezoning approved with a plan, that's your preliminary plan. You may, if that's approved, go on to civil construction plan. So again, just trying to clarify those roles and relationships, and making sure it's as efficient as possible, and the right people are looking at the right information. In terms of conditional zoning, this is one we've spent actually, I think, a fair amount of time, because it's a well-used process in Indian Trail, and really for a lot of the communities in Union County. And so we wanted to clarify, basically, in essence, that the town council has the ability to, really has ultimate flexibility in approving a conditional zoning, and whether that's, to modify standards in the UDO or add extra things or whatnot, but they have the flexibility to do so. The developer always has to agree to accept these conditions, but we just want to clarify that there was some, I'm going to use that term squishy, there's some squishy language that seemed to be not, seem to cloud that a little bit. So we want to make sure that that's abundantly clear, because that's in essence what conditional zoning is intended to do. We've also asked our steward to look at our community meeting process. We were finding that our community meetings, and Katie can probably speak to this better than anyone, they're a wonderful resource for getting feedback from the community on a given rezoning type project. But we were finding that the way we were structuring them, we have 2 meetings, 2 hours each for a given project, one during the day, one during the evening. We were having a lot of time spent where staff is just sitting there with the applicant, kind of twiddling their thumbs, that we weren't getting people to a lot of these meetings. And it's certainly that staff member could be doing certainly other things for the town. If they weren't at that meeting, the developer is obviously, if they're they have their own time, if they're bringing an engineer or a traffic consultant or whatever, they're spending a lot of money on these meetings, and it's just disappointing that that money's, that those resources are are being in essence kind of wasted, if you will. So we asked them to help us. What are other communities doing for community meetings? And they came back and say, well, usually one community meeting is what's required, typically held in the evening time. And so we've we're going to put forth their recommendation for the community meeting to kind of consolidate that a little bit. We're still going to have all the tools that we have now. The signs will still be posted. They can always come in town hall and get more information, have a sit-down meeting with the planner and responsible. You can always point to Katie, Yeah, so they'll still have all those same opportunities, but we just want to make sure, again, we just want to apply the appropriate amount of resources to this, and so that's why we're recommending that change, and why they also came up with that recommendation. Another idea that we're working on, and the sub-bullets here are probably going to subject to change, because it's still something we're actively talking about, is coming up with and again, this is about not having a one-size-fits-all process, and that is coming up with what we're calling a mini conditional zoning process. Again, conditional zonings that you've seen before you, and you've seen quite a few, or most of you have. We have the developer that wants to change the property from low-density residential, let's say, to medium or high-density residential. And so under the conditional zoning process, they put together a concept plan, working with someone like Mr. Noblin. They put together a traffic study, school impact study, maybe even some building representations and things like that, and then go through the process having prepared those resources. Well, they invest money in preparing those plans and technical documents with a high level of risk, because they might spend $100,000, sometimes more, on putting those together, and then they ultimately get before town council that day, and they have no idea if their project's going to be approved or not. They won't know until that point. And so that's a lot of risk for folks to absorb. And so we were brainstorming if there's a way, particularly for smaller, more modest projects, could we come up with an alternative process for that would allow folks to submit, in essence, a simplified application for rezoning, but still give the planning board to recommend and the council ultimately to approve conditions. So someone that wants to change the zoning on their property would just put forth the rezoning application. I want to go from residential to commercial. To really, it's a relatively modest proposal, but maybe it backs up to some residential. So it'd be important maybe to have a couple conditions attached to it. Hey, maybe no gas stations. Hey, maybe we limit the height on light poles. Things like that. Maybe have a couple conditions we attach. But otherwise, it seems like a sensible proposal, and maybe it's not. Maybe it's a little punitive to ask someone to spend, again, $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 to put together all these plans and instruments and documents for something that generally makes sense if you could just button down a few key issues. And so we kind of asked Stewart to explore this mini or conditional rezoning process, and it seems like the more we talk about it and pull things together it makes sense. And in giving the council and the community some protections to ensure development is appropriate, but also being efficient with our development community and property owners, that they can put something forward, without as much front-end investment. And ultimately, if they get it denied, and if denial may be the right answer from the council's perspective, but at least, that customer hasn't invested so much money and receive a denial. And so that's what we're trying to kind of balance. And so that's a lot of information on one little process, but it's so important because of the work you do. I wanted to kind of thoroughly explain that in some of the rationale. And so we've got some criteria there. We looked at, kind of like focusing on small properties, 7 acres or less, maybe unlimited in the downtown overlay, because we have a really clear vision what we want to see there. We're still playing with that, so I'm not going to harp on those details. They may change, and so I don't want to, I don't want to, again, dwell on those. But we would come up with some criteria for that. And so, and ultimately, the council has to approve it, so they have to see the value in that too. So I just want to kind of drill down on that a little bit. Other changes we've made in our kind of administrative chapters is we had different notification requirements for different public hearing types. If you go get a special use permit with the Board of Adjustment, your mailing notification is one distance. If you go to conditional zoning, it's another. Zoning map amendment, and it's some other. And it's confusing, but in particularly, when we have new staff members come on board with, who are looking at it with a fresh set of eyes, it's like hard to keep on track. How many hundreds of feet do we notice different things? So we said, we're just going to say 500 for everything. That was the highest number. Everything with a public hearing gets 500-foot notice, and that's well above what you see in other communities, but it's worked well for Indian Trail. So we're just going to it's kind of like keeping it simple, and that's what we're doing. We've also come up with just other things, like with clarifying re-subdivisions. We get, and Mr. Sandy, I'm sure, has great experience with this. We get folks that from existing subdivisions oftentimes try to re-subdivide their property under the current regulations, and sometimes it's kind of, I'll use that term, squishy. It's unclear, how we should process those using the standards they were approved under or the current standards. And so we just went ahead and clarified, how we're going to handle those and do a better job. I think that's an issue I had, was my fault myself is not being consistent in how we manage those. And so we're just going to use the higher standard when those kind of requests come in. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. And we also came up with another key change, and again, these are all just kind of key changes I'm sharing with you, is coming up with a formal preliminary grading process. And so, oftentimes, with new development, ground up new development, it's an extensive process to go from preparing the plans to actually getting a permit in your hand to go turn dirt. You've got to work with town staff on planning issues, roadways and stormwater with engineering. You've also got to go to DOT and go through their process. You've got Union County Public Works for water and sewer. It's an extensive process, and it can take 6 months or more sometimes, depending on the scope and size of the project. So a lot of communities have what's called a preliminary grading process, where you'll let someone turn dirt a little early while they finish up some other kind of technical items. In our case, it's typically working through Public Works' water and sewer process. So we wanted to we've been kind of doing it, it's not in our code today, but we've kind of been doing it informally. We wanted to just kind of formalize that and get some parameters established. But the idea is, again, to create some efficiencies in time. So while the developer is trying to finalize, maybe, again, in most cases, finalize that water and sewer approval or some other things, they still have the ability to go out and subject to, erosion control requirements and things like that, go ahead and do the early clearing on the property. And so by the time they're done with that, they may have their full permit in hand and can finish the neighborhood or finish the business development. And we've talked about maybe having some financial guarantees put in place, so if the development doesn't come together, goes kaput, we've got a bond or something like that, we could go ahead and revegetate the site so we don't have a dust bowl, if you will. So we've also kind of in our processes looked at how we can handle phase plans, whether that may be like a major subdivision that's broken out into phases, but also even something like, we learned with the Copus Apartments on Old Monroe, where you're phasing individual buildings on a residential site. We're going to see more multifamily development in Indian Trail. That's regardless if any more multifamily gets approved ever. It's, there's entitled projects in our community that, they're going to have, 8, 12, 15 buildings on site, and they are going to want occupancy of those buildings before everything is completely done. And so we wanted to create, improve our tools on how we manage that. So we make sure that, we get all the improvements constructed when the project's done. We want to make sure, like, for example, in the case of multifamily, that, there's safety aspects incorporated in that when you have people living on site in one section of the site while the other section is still technically under some type of construction status. And so it's again, processes that, a lot of other communities have in place. It's just something that we didn't, and we've been kind of having to do it on the fly, if you will, and we just want to kind of structure it a little more. And also in the cases of commercial, we wanted the ability to do interim COs. It's very common in the commercial setting where commercial building is still under construction, or maybe it's even just finishing details, but the retailer may want to stock shelves or train employees over the course of the last 30 days while it's under construction. And so we just want to create some processes where we can allow that where it makes sense. The next piece, the next bullet point with exemptions to nonconformances, this is one that it's just sort of like getting geared up for the Old Monroe widening. You're going to have it's a big project, and I don't have to sell that concept to anyone. Going to be a lot of right-of-way acquisition by NCDOT. We don't know per se. We haven't done any nonconformance analysis, but it's fair to say that there will probably be properties made nonconforming. That is, they no longer meet the standards of our ordinance after right-of-way is acquired. Maybe if it's a commercial business, maybe a row of their parking gets taken out. Now they may not be the parking standard. In a residential case, maybe it's setback. They no longer meet the front setback requirement. And I'm thinking of a property on Indian Trail Road that falls into that category. When they did the bridge project. So it's not, so we kind of had internal discussions, and we don't think it's, when you're non-conforming, you have certain restrictions on your property in terms of if you can expand or make improvements to your property. It also affects sometimes in refinancing, if you want to refinance the loan or if you want to sell the property, it can create some hurdles for you in that. So, we kind of discussed internally how, is that right? When the government comes in and creates that nonconformance for you, is that right to treat it in that way when the property owner or any former property owner has not really done anything to create that nonconforming condition, if you will? So, we created this. We asked Stuart to create a provision, and I've worked with it in other ordinances that will give more rights to property owners that have nonconformances created by right-of-way acquisition. And again, we're just trying to help people out as it relates to, someone, again, a homeowner that had their front setback made nonconforming and not try to remove hurdles if they need to get the house refinanced, or if they go to sell it and not create a closing issue or something like that. And for a commercial property owner, not, completely, constrain their business or the building because 3 or 4 parking stalls got knocked out and now they don't meet the parking requirements. So we're trying to, again, going back to that whole, being business friendly and customer friendly. That's what we're trying. That kind of falls under that wheelhouse, and so we think that's going to be helpful, particularly when the Old Monroe widening comes, because we anticipate those issues coming up. So we want to get geared up for that. There's also, we created some, the enforcement chapter was part of this first package, first deliverable from our consultant. And one of the things we're just trying to do is give our code enforcement officers more tools in managing those little, kind of temporary signs that get put out, what such and such wireless company has a special, and all of a sudden to share that with the community, they got to put 200 little stick in the ground signs out, and so we don't think that enforcing those kind of standards should fall under the same standards as, when someone builds a brick monument sign without a permit or something like that. I think we should have different tools for enforcing those. So they're going to have the ability to more immediately enforce the ordinance when compliance just means, hey, can you send someone out here to pick these up? And so we just want to give them, code enforcement, a few more tools for things like that. Okay. As I said, I was going to go pretty fast. And so I just want to kind of, so it's at 8:02. First, I just want to ask, are there any questions regarding what I just shared with you? Anything jump out at you?
First of all, Rox, I think it's very positive what you're doing. I can see some very positive things in there, and I commend you and your staff for being proactive on these recommendations. So.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah, it's everyone. Everyone's bringing ideas to the table, and so I appreciate that. We would appreciate the support.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to keep the pace going, so we're not here till, the crow, or the rooster crows. But what I want to do with this next part, and this is going to be longer, just so you know, from a sense of time. I want to talk to you about UDO Chapter 500, which is our where we keep our zoning districts located, SF1, SF2, regional business, et cetera, and how you determine if a use is permitted on a property. It also has our dimensional standards. What is my setbacks? How much area do I need on an individual lot to build a house? Things like that. We also have a chapter called Supplementary Use Standards. This is like when standards are attached to a certain use, like tattoo parlors have to be X number of feet away from a neighborhood, things like that. Sign ordinance, and then off-street parking. And so this is some meaty material, so I'll go ahead, and if you're ready, I'll jump right in, and hopefully I do a decent job. All right, so in Division 500, again, this is our zoning districts, and we had a series of challenges with this division, and I'm going to show you before and after so you can visualize it. But really, some of the challenges are, one, that our districts, we have multiple tables for our different zoning districts. So we had one table for residential districts, one table for commercial districts, one table for industrial districts, and one table for institutional districts. And it really just created a lot of challenges. And just in reading it and understanding it and directing people, and it's just, and so we found also there was a lot of missing uses amongst the tables, and in that review we also found that uses oftentimes were outdated, or they're really just are the we even, and Katie was good about this, is this even really a use anymore? And we've changed a lot over the decades and whatnot. So. We kind of found that in reviewing the tables, and we also found that some of our district, we were looking at our residential districts, and we were, thinking out loud, no one ever really wants to use this zoning district when they want to develop a neighborhood or whatnot. So does that mean, should we still have this district, and so what's the point? And so we looked at that also, is should we eliminate any districts? And so, in kind of managing a lot of those concerns, what we wanted to pursue was consolidating all the uses into a single table. So for ease of reference, so you're not looking at 4 or 5 different tables to see where a use is permitted. You can go to one single table. We looked at consolidating all of the lot development standards regarding setback and height and lot area. Consolidate them all into one residential table, and another, and consolidate all the non-residential districts into one table. And again, the idea is ease of reference. It helps with consistency to make sure you're not missing something. And it's just again, user-friendly improvements. We also looked at, again, removing outdated uses and kind of update terminology and consolidation. And this is one thing, and I'll compliment Katie particularly on this, was, consolidating uses where we could into group categories versus having 100 different ways to describe retail development, or retail sales. In terms of having a fish shop, or I don't know, a kitchen store. Help me out, Katie. What are the various ice cream shop?
Antique shop.
Yeah. So and the list went on and on and on. And so we said, what? These are all retail sales. Why don't we just call them retail sales, and we'll take some of this other more detailed stuff and put it in the back if someone really wants to, dig through that. And so that's what we try to do, is consolidate, again, to make it user-friendly, and we think that's going to be better for, the ordinance will be better for it. We also wanted to look at the naming for our districts, and particularly the residential districts. I read all them off earlier. There's SF1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, what does that mean? Well, some people think it means that's the density I get. So SF4, I get 4 units per acre. No, you don't. That's not what it means. It really doesn't. We're not. I think the best answer I heard, and I can't remember who shared, is, well, that's just the order. They started with 1, and they went to 2, then they went to 3, and then went to 4. I'm like, oh, actually, that's better than I could come up with. So we decided we wanted to rename the districts, at least residential districts, to something that means something. And so what we decided to do was to name them based on lot area. So how big does a lot have to be? 8,000 square feet, 12,000 square feet, 40,000 square feet. So that's how we renamed them. And so I think SF1 today is now going to be called SF40 for 40,000 square foot lot area. And so again, have some relevancy, of where that name came from. We think that'll be appreciated by our building community. So I told you I'd share you examples because that's a lot of words. So here's like an example of our our current tables. Here are residential and commercial use tables. Again, they're separate. They're multiple pages long, but these are just quick snapshots. And here's the institutional and industrial districts. There you see them there. And so we've taken that and given you this. Okay, so we've taken all that information and put it on one table. Another piece we asked is let's color code it. And so there are standard colors used for use types, commercial, industrial, institutional, in the planning profession, and we have used those same color tones in the cells. So, for example, commercial is regarded as generally when you see mapping, a commercial zoning district is shown as red. Well, we've used red on our commercial districts. And yellow is typically a residential color tone, so we've used yellow tones for nearly all of our residential. And so, again, we've put everything on one single table, and we've also, what this again allows us to do is make sure every use is addressed comprehensively, which was not the case in our current tables. But again, it gives you a nice, clean image, to determine, is my business allowed here? Can I build a house here? And any key standards I need to kind of be aware of. And so, and this also shows up very well if you're using a tablet or a smartphone, a lot more so than that. So going from this to this. And then this is an example of I mentioned our dimensional standards, setbacks, heights, and things like that. This is what it looks like. And we're going to go to something more like this. Again, a nice organized table, a lot more information, cleaner to look at. You can also see how we're naming some of those districts on the top heading. SF, I'm sorry, my eyes aren't as good to see them up there, but SF 12, 10, 8, et cetera. So again, we're trying to give those some use, or give those names some meaning, if you will. We've also, again, I mentioned we were going to consolidate, look at the districts to see what should be consolidated, and through consensus, we agreed SF2. Really, just no one has ever asked to develop an SF2 or establish it on their property. We're going to verify this, but I don't believe there are even any neighborhoods that are zoned SF2. So we felt this was the sort of low-hanging fruit to eliminate that. And so what we did by taking that out, we then re-examined each of the key standards in the districts in terms of lot area and setbacks and made slight tweaks to them to account for that. So it's a nice even spacing. And we're going to continue to make kind of refinements on that. Okay, one piece I wanted to kind of hit on also, and again, this is all kind of speaks to the goal of being efficient. For our for not only staff but a development community, but also come up with some more kind of one-size-fits-all, or get away from the one-size-fits-all approach for land development. And so again, it's no surprise for a planning board that to develop a neighborhood, and generally speaking, you're going to go through the full conditional rezoning process for a residential project. And so the reason why folks might go through the conditional process or go through a rezoning process is ultimately they want to develop a more urban or smaller lot type than what's allowed in the district. So they may be a smaller area, 8,000 square foot lot, 20 to 25 foot front setback, and then 5 or 6 foot side setbacks. And so that's really why they're coming to get that property rezoned, is to take advantage of that lot type. And so what we try to do, a concept that we're exploring is coming up with some alternative district standards where, a district will have, SF 12 will have a 12,000 square foot lot type. It'll have a minimum width of, I'm sorry, I'm reading from afar, but 60 feet and et cetera, et cetera. Those will be the standards applicable at district, but we'll have a set of alternative standards that whereby if someone is willing, someone that wants to take advantage of these alternative standards that allow you to do a smaller lot type, you will also, to take advantage of those, you will have to build a higher quality house. And so it may have a more higher material, higher quality materials, or, we'll look at other maybe standards in terms of garage placement or other things that if you agree to take advantage of these smaller lot type standards, then you will in kind agree to build a higher quality house. And so, again, we're trying to give people more opportunities to develop in the base districts, and kind of get away from the kind of the one size, fits all approach with the conditional zoning. Again, this is a process that ultimately has to be approved by council, but this is something that, we're trying to explore as a way to help, facilitate projects and ensure that balance that, ensure the community is, protected, but also make sure the process is efficient as possible, and that there may be more than one path to achieve everyone's mutual goal. And I'm going to stop right there. Did that make sense, what I explained? I just wanted, okay. And again, this is not something, this alternative standards is something relatively new. I think it's something that, we've been trying to explore in response to, the state had taken the all towns' abilities to have design guidelines for homes. And so it's something also that we're trying to respond with that, to where people, developers or builders will voluntarily agree to these. So we're going to continue to flesh that out. Okay, and again, continuation of how these are the non-residential districts, this is how we're going to organize information, nice and clean, very straightforward. Okay. In terms of special purpose districts, I'm not going to dwell on this very long, but one thing I did want to update you on is related to the downtown overlay district, and that is something, a key standard we're going to incorporate or propose to be incorporated, which is, the town's investing a lot of money in concert with the state as well in terms of the Main Street project on Indian Trail Road, doing curb and gutter, sidewalk, and other streetscape improvements, and really try to create that Main Street that Indian Trail never really had. And with that, we're hoping that's going to spur development in downtown Indian Trail and create some a really a community really a community resource town-wide. And so what we want to make sure is with the amount of investment that that's public investment that's going in, we want to make sure the right development occurs along those key streets. And so with that, we want to require that that there is multi-story development along those key corridors, that the town doesn't go in and invest tens of millions of dollars, or the town with state money as well, investing all of this millions of dollars, and then someone goes in on that street and builds underdevelops it with a simple, modest one-story building type. We're trying to encourage downtown type development, and while we'd love to see 3- and 4-story development, we want to make sure at least it'll be 2-story, and again, try to create that downtown that we don't have, and really I don't think we've ever, to my knowledge, have ever really had. And so that's a key kind of change we're going to make in requiring multi-story development. We're making some other changes to these special purpose districts, but they're relatively modest, and I'll just kind of continue on from here. Okay. Again, just in brief, we have these other conditional type districts, planned unit development districts. Southgate over at Rocky River and Poplin is in the planned unit development. We also have these mixed use districts. They don't get used very often, and we still think that we think they're districts that have value. So we asked Stuart to help us kind of tweak the standards in those districts to make them more enticing for development, because we think they have value. So we've been incorporating some flexibility in those. And tweaking the standards to where the development community might be more enticed to use them, because we do think they're good ways to plan and organize developments with multiple uses on the site. So looking at things like minimizing the number of uses required and things like that. But again, the idea is just to take what we have and make it more appealing for a developer to take advantage of, and we think will benefit us as well, because they are good ways to organize development. Okay, I'm going to jump to supplementary use requirements, and again, I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on this other than this one table, and I promise I won't read this table to you. But one of the things we do a lot of is permitting for accessory structures. So Mr. Sandy decides he wants to take up that woodworking hobby that he's always wanted to jump into, and he wants to build himself a woodworking shed, And, he's got to come in and get a permit from us, probably a permit from the county. And there's requirements on how big it can be and how far it can be from property lines and from the house and whatnot. And one of the problems we've had with our ordinance is that we treat accessory structures, and the accessory structure that maybe might be permitted in Brandon Oaks, we use the same system that for someone that has a 5-acre property or a 10-acre property and wants to have something bigger, to maybe a woodworking shop or a place to turn some wrenches on their cars or something like that. And so we asked Stuart to help us with that, to come up with a different system of how we look at accessory structures that is matching, that is more fair to the type of property that the home is located on. So we think a different system in Brandon Oaks or Beacon Hills should be used on a more rural property that might have several acres and has the ability to absorb a big shed for woodworking or a barn or something like that. So we just wanted to create a more fair system, and because we do a ton of accessory structure permitting, so we think the citizens will definitely benefit from this. We've also just, again, we've tried to streamline our fencing requirements, and Katie was helpful with this, and her taking a fresh look at it and saying, the standards aren't bad, but man, it's really hard to read. And how's a homeowner or a business owner supposed to translate this into how they build a fence on their property? And so that she was very helpful with that. We've also are going to try to update our standards for outdoor storage of merchandise on properties. We have two kind of scenarios that we're trying to balance. We have the one scenario, is how to manage a property, and it's not in our community, but I know most people are familiar with it. A place like the trailer sales facility in Stallings, it's fairly new, but it's just a big site, and there's trailers everywhere. And, is that really is that type of facility one that we want in our community, where, you just have trailers everywhere, or maybe it's storage sheds or something like that, where they use, the parking lots and whatnot to display their merchandise? Is that, really how we want our business community to look like? And then also how to make sure, the other example, so we want to come up with standards for something like that to make sure that sites, support our goals for aesthetics in the community. And also look at places like Home Depot or Lowe's and Walmart and how they have outdoor seasonal sales and things like that. Just kind of improve our current processes for things like that. So we asked Stuart to look at those two scenarios and make sure our regulations are appropriate for outdoor merchandise. Okay. Home occupations is another area, that we've spent a fair amount of time, and we've asked Stuart to do some more homework on that, is making sure we're regulating home occupations correctly. And it's more towards making sure, again, that we're being fair to our citizens who want to open a business or operate a business out of their home, particularly if it's something that doesn't have any discernible impacts. And so, the example I always share that I think the ordinance does not do a great job on is how we treat independent contractors. If you work for Morris Jenkins Heating and Air, and you take, the boss lets you take your service van home with you at night, you don't need a permit from us. You don't need anything. You're fine. But yet, if you're, Stanley's Heating and Air, and you're an independent operator, and you take your van home, and maybe you do paperwork on your kitchen table at night, you need a major home occupation permit from us. And we just don't think we just think the ordinance isn't fair in that regards. And so we've asked them to kind of look at that from a fairness standpoint. And because we know that, the home-based businesses are an active part of our economy and in our community, and it's going to grow. I don't think it's going to retract. So we want to make sure we encourage that and have appropriate regulations for it, and not do anything that might detract from that, but also making sure that we're protecting the neighbors as well and not permitting inappropriate businesses in neighborhoods. So we just asked them to kind of help us with that and improve our processes for that and making sure we're being fair. And I'll just keep on going. Beekeeping, it's a big growing hobby, I guess you could say, in the state has basically enabled beekeeping in almost all residential cases. So we do have the ability to adopt some standards, and we wanted to take advantage of the standards that we could. The idea is to encourage beekeeping, but also make sure it's done in a safe manner, and so that's what we've done. We've also, I'm not going to dwell on the standards, but just gives us the ability to address nuisance bees, if you will. And so and some standards on how bees can be managed on properties, again, to minimize impacts. Chickens, we get a lot of requests for chickens. It's not something that comes up really for the planning board, but there's this kind of agriculture from home kind of concept is growing. We get, I'd say not weekly, maybe a couple monthly easily, people wanting to do chickens in their properties. It's a trend. The city of Charlotte has pretty liberal opportunities to have chickens on your property. I have neighbors, and I live in a conventional subdivision, and that easily could be an Indian Trail, and I've got neighbors that have chickens under those ordinances, and that's something that Indian Trail's been kind of behind the times on. So we've created some allowances for having some chickens in terms of how many you can have and how far it should be from the property line and whatnot. So this is something that I think the citizens will be particularly happy with, or many of them will be, because they've been kind of bummed out. They move here from other communities that allow them, and they're excited. They just assume because we have a rural context in our community that they could do it, and they get really bummed when we give them that answer. And so I think this will be exciting. In terms of other animal types like pigs and goats and things like that, the UDO is not addressing. We asked our Stuart to help us with that and see if it's appropriate. They advise us that should be more of an animal ordinance, and the town should consider that separately. And so you won't see a widespread, farms in our neighborhoods. Okay, landscaping. Again, what we try to do is make the landscaping requirements more easily to discern. That's one, and I'm going to jump back to that use table that I shared with you at the beginning of the presentation. But in terms of if I'm developing a commercial site, how do I know what my landscaping requirements are? We try to simplify that. Our current landscaping ordinance, and I don't know, Mr. Sandy, if you've ever had a chance, or Mr. Noble, but it's you're turning and you think you got it, but then you find 3 more pages and you got some more, and it's just bless their heart, they tried, but it just didn't come together. And so that's really a lot of what we try to do is keep the same requirements, or at least the intent of what the ordinance is trying to do, not try to scale anything back per se, but just make it easier to see and find. And we did make some other changes. On larger sites, we do think a landscape professional should be designing the landscape plans. We don't think necessarily a civil engineer is the right professional to be designing landscape plans, and so we do have a requirement for that. I'm sure Mr. Noblin can nod his head in agreement with that. That's why you see the dwarf Burford holly, shrub, lining every parking lot, along 74 or whatnot. It's in the book, and that's what folks use. It's relatively inexpensive. We'd like to see some more creativity on these larger sites. And so if you look here, so today, if you go to our ordinance, the way our buffers work is, how do I know, what size buffer do I put on my property? Well, we look at, if you want to be, and I'm afraid I don't have here we go, perfect. So here's a table in our landscape chapter, and if I am a bank, I am a type 2 use, and then I match that up with what I'm next to. If I'm next to a house, that would be a lower category use, and then that tells me what my buffer is going to be, 10 feet, 25 feet, 50 feet. And so it's a kind of a hard to read table. What we did is, and we found that many uses aren't included in our tables here. It's just a quick snapshot. So what we did in terms of making it user-friendly is we went back to our use table I showed you earlier, and we added a new column here called Land Use Group, and we grouped all of our uses. You're a 1, a 2, a 3. That's how intense you are. And then we took that, and that will tell developers or landscape professionals who are designing plans, what type of intensity their use is, and helps them determine, do I need a 10-foot, 15-foot buffer, or 25 or 50? And so, my proposed use is I'm doing a bank. I'm a type 2 use, and I'm coming up against a single-family neighborhood, so I need to provide a 25-foot buffer. Again, we're not changing, making it more strict, more liberal. We're just trying to make the information easier to find and use, and so we think that that helps us do that. Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm getting a thumbs up from Mr. Noble. I appreciate that. We made some other changes with the landscape ordinance. We provide some more exemptions for landscaping, particularly tree retention in our downtown. Again, that's a place for the most intense development, and so that's not where you try to accomplish all of your tree conservation goals. So we just recognize that concept that we're all familiar with. Made some small tweaks. We no longer, right now, when you design parking lot landscaping, you have to do math, which could never figure that out. You calculate what's called a shading requirement. You have X square feet of asphalt, and then X percent needs to be shaded, and you do some math, and that tells you how many trees to plant. I just never understood why you have to do math in putting in trees in a parking lot. So what we just came up with was a more practical standard is we want to see trees at the end of each row of parking, and then a tree island every 12 spaces. And so simple system, anybody, you can explain it to someone in 5 seconds, and they understand what they need to do in designing a parking lot landscape plan. So that's kind of what we did. And you end up achieving really the same results. It's just a simpler system. Again, here we just took, this is our trees conservation requirements, and we're not going into this in any detail. I just want to, we have this table. It's kind of hard to read. Some of the information it's just hard to represent. And we just converted that table into some very clear bullet points. And again, it's just to make it easier to read and digest. In keeping the standards relatively intact, we did there were some standards that were punitive, and we kind of relaxed them a bit, but really the system still stays the same. Okay, signs. This is one section, and we're getting towards the end, I promise. Signs is a section of the UDO that received a pretty big overhaul, and that was because of some case law that occurred that required all communities in the country to change their ordinances. And so this section, again, received a pretty big overhaul. One provision we're doing is kind of matching up with DOT guidelines and eliminating the ability to do off-premise signs unless you are like a regional destination, like, the movie theater or an event center or something like that. We want businesses to have signage but we also want to kind of prevent sign clutter in our community. And so we don't want someone that's 500 feet away from the road to be able to put a road sign up, even if they can get an easement. We just don't think that's going to result in too many signs and creates kind of a cluttered appearance, and something you see more in rural communities than you do the suburban communities like ours. Create some provisions for pole signs. Right now you can do a pole sign on 74. It's not the best appearance, we think, for signs, and so we try to create a balance where you can have a pole sign, but you still have to build a base for it. And that way it's kind of a balance of help create an attractive sign that doesn't have too much mass when you build it like 20 feet high and not doing a 20-foot-high monument. So we just create some allowances there. Also with the weekends, signs that are put up related to advertising subdivisions under construction, and marketing them. Just try to provide some more allowances for that are reasonable, more standards. Probably the biggest one that we spent the most time, and we're still continuing the conversation, is our temporary signs. This is the ones that you probably see the most, whether that's a good thing or not. But our business community is definitely, it's recognized they need these types of signs to help market their products. I think we received since I've been here communication that really Indian Trail should try to relax their temporary sign guidelines. That it's right now we generally just allow banners to be put up above the business or out in a banner display by the road. And so many times per year, they've asked us, and I'm just kind of summarizing, to see if we could, look at other ways to help them out with temporary signage needs. And so we've been looking at the different technologies, and again, it's trying to walk that tightrope in terms of, giving businesses the tools that they need to be successful, but also doing it in a way that doesn't compromise our community aesthetics, and not seeing a circus act, in the parking lot of someone that's having a sale or something like that. So, we've looked at really heavy at these feather flags. We think that, that's something that's been in our community and other communities for years. We think it's a technology that's inexpensive, relatively clean looking, and is accepted, generally across the board in terms of marketing things. So we are creating more allowances for the feather flags. In our stakeholder committee, and Ms. Towns and actually Ms. Mee, you were at that same one. I think there was uniform agreement that the wavy man should not be allowed. we all love the wavy man, but I guess, it just, and it's not allowed today. It's just that it's a distracting, and again, kind of compromises our aesthetics. The ones we're continuing to kind of still discuss internally is things like balloons or these streamers, and again, what technologies we think are appropriate or tools. But we do know we need to have more allowances. And there was agreement, and we're fortunate, we have the chairperson of the Union County Chamber of Commerce on our steering committee, so she's able to provide a lot of that small business feedback that she hears. And it's good to hear that, again, she completely recognized that the tightrope, the tightrope that you have to kind of walk in. And so she was able to provide us some good feedback of what, she hears and what might be reasonable in trying to accomplish those two goals and how to make them supportive of each other. So we were really thankful for that. But again, the consensus was, allow these type of signs up for a limited period, so many times per year, and have a gap in between each time they're up. And so that you don't have someone that just has banners or feather flags up 365 days per year. And so, Ms. Towns, did you have a? Oh, I'm sorry, I saw your hand. I didn't.
Oh, no.
You're just waving with the
The wavy man.
Don't we all? I tried to get the big gorilla on the roof, but they voted me out. I thought that would be a great addition, but anyways. Other things we're looking at for signs is restricting window signs. That's, when people whether they put up a sign, an actual sign, hey, today's special is, or other people that kind of wrap their windows with graphics, if you will, and they completely black them out. It's not the best appearance, but also it's not safe from our law enforcement perspective. And so kind of working with the UCSO, we kind of came up with allowing folks to cover their windows, but up to 35%. And again, creates at least from a safety perspective, at least some opening for the law enforcement community to be able to see in the business and make sure things are happening safely. Again, we try to just clarify our requirements for LED and just consolidating LED signs and putting it in a single place in a table that's clear and easy to find. And same thing with our other sign types. It's spread throughout the UDO. It's hard to read. Again, consolidating it into a table. And so this is an example of one of our tables. And again, trying to just consolidate this information together into this. So again, one single place, nice, clean, easy to find, easy on the eyes. Again, picture using a tablet, smartphone, a lot easier to review versus that or that. Again, that's the idea. Okay, I promise we are getting there. Again, parking requirements. We're trying to consolidate all of our parking requirements into a single table. Right now, it's spread whether it's conventional parking in a park. How many off-street parking spaces do I need for my business? We also have parking requirements for bicycles. How many bike racks do I need to put up? If you're a drive-through business, how long does my stacking lane need to be so I don't create impacts in my parking lot or on the public road? So we have all these different standards, and they're spread all throughout the parking ordinance. And we're trying to get to something like this where we just put it all in the same table. And again, nice, clean, and consolidated. That's the idea here. Not really taking a major policy swing one way or the other. The only parking standard that we are intentionally changing or recommending for change is the overflow parking requirement for multifamily and townhome uses. We require for every 4 required parking spaces in an apartment complex, you have to build 1 guest space, and that is far, far, far and above what is needed, and much higher than what you see in any other community. And so we recognize and we want to see overflow parking opportunities, but that rate is way too high. And on the surface, you might think, well, who cares? Let's just have it high. The downside of that is certainly it's wasted money, but it's also unnecessary asphalt, and that asphalt could be something else. Maybe it could be green space instead. And when you have asphalt, what do you have? Well, you have more stormwater. It means you have bigger stormwater ponds, and you have more impacts to our ditches and creeks and the other conveyance methods or conveyance devices for our stormwater. So there's a trickle-down impact, and so we want to make sure the parking is right-sized for the use. And that's one use that we just really feel like is just off. And so that's why we'll be recommending that change. And just wanted to kind of show, but I want to call it out specifically because we are changing that. Okay, so you have survived the presentation. That is not the entire UDO. We still have these divisions that Stuart is still working on some revisions for us. They're not in a stage where I felt I wanted to share them with you. I might come back at the next meeting if you'll have me, and we'll maybe talk about these and any other updated sections, and we may have more time if you want to have an open dialogue. But again, I just also wanted to share with you some of the next steps, and these are all tentative. But we're going to want to meet with the planning board tonight and give you an update on the UDO project. Later this week, we're going to meet with the Board of Adjustment. I'm going to give a similar update. Wish them well, and then we'll update Town Council, and then put together a public review draft for once all the updates have been prepared. We'll put it all in one document, put it out there on the website, and let the general public have a chance to review. And then, of course, like any ordinance amendment, we'll go to council, the planning board and council for final adoption. So just a quick snapshot. Don't put too much on the dates because those are always subject to change, but I just want to speculate what I could in putting this together. So again, it's a big project, team effort, again, staff working on it together. We've got a great consultant team. We've got great boards that are all, we also need support from. And so our goal is, our ultimate goal is to accomplish all those items I shared initially in terms of user friendliness, providing assistance where we can with the business community, and really trying to make Indian Trail the best community we can through our development standards. And so that's what I have, and I'll certainly take any questions you have about the information I shared or any next steps.
Any questions? I have one question or several questions. The effective date, is there a date that you have set aside to implement this?
Yes, so it will not be, I don't have the date for you, but your question is good, that it will not be effective the night it gets adopted. We will probably have some ease-in period.
Okay. And another question, I know you're probably checking with other municipalities, and the one, when you mentioned something a while ago about taking advantage of reduced setbacks to build better quality homes, is that something you've seen in other municipalities? Is that something that a trend out there, and what kind of response are the municipalities getting from that?
I would say it's not necessarily, it's something I had heard of in other communities were kind of thinking about and contemplating back, again, a couple years ago when the state, removed residential design standards from communities. And so it's a way to, it's a way to help out both entities, the town as well as the developers in terms of, working together to help them build the neighborhoods that meet contemporary standards in terms of smaller lots.
Right.
But agree to the architectural requirements that we would want to see on a smaller lot development.
Okay.
And so we have talked, preliminarily. I spoke with the school of government at UNC about that approach. Would this still be in compliance with the state law? We've talked to our Stuart, our consultant, and our own attorneys, and there's consensus that this would still be a legal process that we could do.
Okay, and one final question. I know there's opportunities to listen to the developer and get their feedback, and sometimes take that with a grain of salt, but at least give them a chance to vent. I mean, sometimes at least they've been heard.
Yes.
If there's some issues that they have you done anything along that lines as far as, and I hate to, maybe a public forum or whatever, and let them come and express their ideas. I mean, being in the business over the years, I mean, I've heard that Indian Trail was the hardest town to get anything approved and all this other stuff, and harder to deal with, but and I take it with a grain of salt myself, because I mean, that may or may not be true, but I know you're doing the right thing for Indian Trail. But have you got any feedback from them, or do you anticipate listening to what they have to say, and not necessarily that you need to do it, just listen to them?
No, absolutely. And so I think, in twofold. One is, we started out with a stakeholder group, which was that broad cross-section, which included a lot of, realtors, land developers, home builders.
Right.
And it was more the open forum. All right, you've worked in our community, what's working well, what's not. And we got a lot of feedback there, but also we have this steering committee that is provides a more continuous check-in on that committee, amongst, board members like Ms. Towns, we have Representative Typar Development, who does commercial, residential, and industrial development in our community and other communities. We also have a representative from Eagle Engineering. I think we all know Eagle Engineer. They do a lot of land design work in the community, and so we wanted, and we also have other representatives, to represent other interests. We wanted to have those individuals on our committee to ensure that that voice was heard.
Okay.
And I think also with that, when we do a public review draft, where we get it all cleaned up, put together, we want to put it out there, and part of that is to let the development community kind of chew on it as well if they.
Okay. All right. Appreciate you.
Yes, sir. No, it's a good question.
Yes, sir.
Is there like, are you making any, like, exception? You use the example of the shed, right?
Okay, sure.
If someone were to come now, are you making any exception to the new proposed standard versus, or we just stand hard, fast? Because I would think if I was willing to build something in December, the old standard, in January it comes out, then I'm pretty upset.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that's kind of an implementation process, and so it's sort of like, when you go to the mall to buy something, and then you're about to buy a pair of jeans, and then, the clerk's nice enough to tell you, well, hey, if you come back in 2 days, we're going to knock 25% off these, and so I think part of that needs to be a communication that, if there's opportunities for folks to benefit from these new standards that have been adopted by the council, if they're willing to wait, that we want to make sure we're not holding it back on that information, and make sure everyone has all the opportunities to improve their property.
Oh, so so in that scenario, you would share, hey, this is
So
potential new standard, and
yeah,
you
so
decide
I
whether
think-
you want to move
Yeah,
forward or
I think
not.
that would be kind of like
Right.
with the individual planner or town employee that, if they see an example of someone applying, let's say there's a 3-month, grow-in period, or transition period between old ordinance, new ordinance. Someone comes in with a shed, they want to come in with, let's say the code limits them to 800 square feet, they come in with 1,000, old code doesn't allow it, new code would, then, at a minimum, I think, we're going to make sure the planning staff knows what the new standards are and say, hey, if you can just slow down on this, 30 days from now, you're going to be able to do this and more. I think that's incumbent upon us from a customer service perspective.
Yep.
Couldn't help but notice when you said sale, Katie's face lit up real big. Okay.
Well, again, this is just an early check-in, or a I guess maybe a mid-level check-in. Again, you'll have, at some point later in the year, a more complete presentation by Stuart when we go through the adoption process. And again, if the schedule works, I'd like to come back at the next meeting and just give you an update of any other information I can. Again, I want to keep you informed, and so you're not, hit cold with a lot of information that you haven't had any exposure to. And if you have any offline questions, any comments, you want to shoot me an email, or pick up the phone because you want to just better understand something I explained tonight, please do so. I'm available anytime.
Do you also have a planning report tonight?
I'm going to use that as my planning report, so.
Okay.
But thank you for asking. That's all we
Alrighty.
have.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Again, I want to mention that we are a recommending board, so this will go to the town council, and the town council will appreciate any comments and concerns that you might have.